Welcome to this presentation regarding business organizations. I'm sharing my desktop with you, so let's go to for a moment. I'm going to go to Learning Modules. And we're on Module 6. I'm going to scroll up here. And we have our assigned reading called Forming Corporations. This is a very brief survey about how corporations function and how there's a limitation on liability. If you have taken the course Business Organizations, which is LGLA 2311, this is going to seem very simplistic, but it gives you kind of an introduction if you haven't had the course. But don't worry if you haven't had LGLA 2311 before. This is not a project that requires any of that knowledge. So now we're going to go to our, we're going to go to the resource, and it's actually, let me flip back here so I can show you. It's actually referenced down here. This is the website that you would use to access the Texas Secretary of State website. I'm not actually going to click on that. I'm going to just Google that tool. So I'm going to type in Texas Secretary of State. And the first hit, of course, is going to be Texas Secretary of State. And then we're going to go to Business Filings. Click on that. And I am going to go to, I'm going to go over here to let me just show you, business nonprofit forms. And this gives us a list of all of the forms that are available or that have been prepared by the Texas Secretary of State's office. Let me pause for a second and tell you a little bit about what a Secretary of State for a state does. Many times we hear about the Secretary of State for our country. It's currently John Kerry. In the past, it's been Hillary Rodham Clinton, and we've had obviously several others over the history of the country. And usually what they do is jet set from one trouble spot in the world, and they use diplomacy to solve international dilemmas. That is not what a state Secretary of State does at all. The Texas Secretary of State is the person who manages all of the filings, corporate filings, other business filings that occur. It's not a glamorous assignment by any means, and obviously there's a significant staff that handle these matters. So Mrs. Berry, who is our current Texas Secretary of State, doesn't personally handle these matters, but she's responsible for that function overall. The Texas Secretary of State, like many other states, many other states, Secretary of State, difficult to say quickly, provide on their website forms that can be used to accomplish various tasks for corporations, partnerships, and companies of various stripes. These forms in Texas do not have to be followed, but they are a very handy tool. They are oftentimes used by individuals who feel like they don't need to hire an attorney because the forms themselves are quite easy and quite simple to complete, and they don't take a lot of time. When a company goes to a law firm, the law firm can use these forms, or the law firm can use its own forms, and the Texas Secretary of State will accept law firm forms that are not the same as the forms that we see here. But for the purpose of this class, we're just going to use the forms that are available on the Texas Secretary of State website. We're going to make it easy. And you'll see in this first section, the 200s, we have 8 options listed here. And all of the options, except for the bottom one, start with the words Certificate of Formation. See here? Certificate of Formation for a for-profit corporation, Certificate of Formation for a nonprofit corporation, Certificate of Formation for a professional corporation, Certificate of Formation for a professional association, Certificate of Formation for a limited liability company, Certificate of Formation for a professional limited liability company, Certificate of Formation for a limited partnership. We're not going to worry about number 8 right now. So you can see they all start with the same words. So this is the document that you use when you want to create a particular type of business entity. And obviously the type of business entity you're going to create is described at the end here. In some jurisdictions, there are different names for this document. For example, in most jurisdictions, the creation of a corporation are called the Articles of Incorporation. We do not use that term in Texas. You might say that would be handy if we used it in Texas, and I can see the argument for that because that's the most common term used in other jurisdictions. But I would argue that it's nice that no matter what you're creating in Texas, you call it a certificate of formation. Because even in states, most states have limited liability companies, for example, but they don't call those articles of incorporation because nothing's being incorporated, because a corporation is not being created. So while our name for corporation is a little bit unorthodox, it makes it a lot easier just to have to remember one terminology. And the forms themselves are very similar because the state of Texas has pretty much required the same type of information, no matter whether you're creating a corporation or a limited liability company or even a limited partnership. Okay, so let's, I'm just going to scroll down here and show you some other forms too. There are some additional forms available. One is, this next section has to do, the 300s have to do with situations in which a corporation already exists and has been created in another state. It could be any of the other 49 states. And that corporation or that company or that partnership wants to now do business in Texas, wants to open up a storefront or wants to sell things in Texas or whatever that particular issue is. It wants to do business here. Well, it can't until it becomes registered in our state. And this is the form that, one of these forms, whichever one applies, that would be the form that that particular legal entity would use. Once the entity chooses to do business in Texas and completes this form, then the entity is required to follow both Texas rules and the rules of the state of its birth state, of the place that it was created. And you'll find for the application for registration, much of the same information is required for a certificate of formation. Then there's some other forms. This is when you have a situation where you're changing your registered agent. One of the things that these forms require, whether it's a certificate of formation or an application for registration, is you have to list a registered agent. What is a registered agent? A registered agent is an entity or an individual who is available to accept service of process. And of course, service of process you may recall from federal civil litigation or from introduction to the law and legal professions or to Texas litigation, civil litigation. You may recall that is the process by which a lawsuit begins. The plaintiff sues the defendant. Well, the plaintiff has to serve the defendant with legal paperwork before the defendant is required to answer. And of course, when you're suing a human being, a natural person, then you serve that actual human being. But if you're serving a legal entity like a corporation, well, a corporation doesn't have arms and legs. It doesn't have a brain. It's a legal fiction. It can't be touched. It's a concept more so than a living, breathing person. But of course, a corporation or a partnership acts through individuals, its agents, who are usually its employees, but not necessarily. And those people can do tasks that the company or the corporation want to have happen. So what happens in this case, because the corporation can't receive service of process itself because it's not tangible, it has to appoint somebody or some entity that will accept service of process. And then the person who wants to sue that corporation or company or partnership can go to that person or that entity that's the registered agent, and that is how the legal documents are served. Obviously, over time, it may be necessary to change that information. Maybe you had one individual in your company who's going to be the registered agent. Well, he leaves the company or he dies. And so under those circumstances, it would need to be changed. There are other times where you may need to resubmit a certificate of formation. Perhaps there's been some changes, there's been some amendments. And we see down here on 315 and 314 when there are some amendments that has required there to be some change. We have a certificate of amendment. Whether it's a restatement or amendment is a technical issue which we won't approach in this class. And then we have here in the 500 some information about how to register a name. let's say that you have a great idea for a business and you come up with a catchy name you just love. It's you know, Trixie's Tricks, and it's a company that's going to train dogs how to perform tricks. And so you're calling it Trixie's Tricks, and you think that's very clever. But you know what? As soon as you decide on the name, it's not magical that you're going to be able to immediately incorporate your business, which you're going to call Trixie's Tricks Incorporated. So you might want to reserve the name before you actually commit your certificate of formation, because maybe someone will grab up that name before you have the time to actually commit or file your certificate of formation. You want to reserve that name. You may even want to reserve the name in other states. You may be starting your business in Texas, but you have some business connections in Oklahoma, and you're thinking, well, I'll see how things go in Collin County, and then maybe I'll branch out into Tarrant or Denton or Rockwall County or Dallas County. But eventually I'm planning to head on up to Tulsa because I have these business connections there. Well, you may want to reserve the name in Oklahoma so that an Oklahoman in the meantime can't go ahead and pick that name because you've already reserved it. It's not expensive to reserve a name, and it does protect your right as long as the reservation is in effect. Another thing that businesses commonly do is they might want to operate under an assumed name, this 503. Sometimes assumed names are called fictitious names, but when you use that term, it kind of sounds a little heavy-cavy, like, ooh, you have an alias, ooh, you may be doing something you ought not be doing. Not at all. It's routine for businesses to have one name as their corporate name and have another name that may have no connection whatsoever be the name that the customers deal with. For example, the restaurant Chili's isn't, the corporation that owns it isn't Chili's, it's Brinker International. The company that owns Red Lobster isn't Red Lobster, it's Darden. And that's pretty common to have this name because the Darden company thought, gee whiz, no one really wants to eat at a seafood restaurant called Darden, but we think Red Lobster is an appealing name. And the Brinker family, or that owns this corporation, or at least at one point owned the corporation, said, well, geez, no one wants to eat at a restaurant called Brinker's, but they might well want to eat at a restaurant called Chili's. So there's nothing ethical or heavy-cavy about it. It's just an example of effective marketing. So when you choose a name that is different than the legal name of the entity, then it's a good practice for you to reserve that name, to file an assumed name certificate so that you have access to that name. So let's say you decided not to incorporate your business as Trixie's Tricks. You've decided to incorporate it as Dog Training School Incorporated, but your name that you're going to use to market is going to be Trixie's Tricks. So you would have the assumed name of Trixie's Tricks. Many times the assumed name is referred to as a DBA, or doing business as. And then the rest of the entities I don't think we'll need to talk about today. Oh, down here we have information about limited liability partnerships. We're not doing that for this particular course, but those are separated from the other business entities that we have. We even had limited partnerships in the first list, but down here you'll see down in the 700s of where you see the limited liability applications. And I think we'll just go up to the top where we're going to focus on these first, the 200 numbers. The assignment that we have is you're going to want to use Form 205. Now, I'm not going to use that one. I'm going to use the one for a for-profit corporation. And you'll see that you have a choice here. You can use either the Word document or the PDF. I'm going to work with both of them for a second just so you can see how they go. So I'm going to click on the PDF. That's going to open up. Oops, here we go. And I'm going to, in order to do this successfully, I'm going to have to open with a different viewer, so I'm going to click on this. And I'm going to open up here. Oops. I'm learning Spanish in my spare time. There we go. Okay, a little bit more useful. So now we can go ahead and fill the blanks if we want to. Maybe we can't. Maybe I don't have that on this one. Some of my computers I have the ability to fill blanks in, and some I don't. It looks like this one is not one that I do. So I'm not going to want to use the PDF. If you have a version of Adobe that you can fill in blanks, then you can use that. But if you don't, no big deal. What you will instead do, let me go back here, is you will use the Word form. So I'm going to go to again, the form 201, I'm going to go to Word. Okay, so here we go. Enabling editing. The first thing that you'll notice is that there's a lengthy area for instructions, how to complete the form. My suggestion when you're working with this is to print it out so you don't have to flip back and forth, but that's of course not necessary. They have instructions, but for the most part this is highly, highly intuitive. So we have here the filing entity being formed as a for-profit corporation. The name of the entity is, and we just type it here, and I'm just going to make up some information. I'm going to call it Dog Training School, and I'm going to put a comma here, and they tell me below what are signals I could use. I could use corporation, company, incorporated, or limited. I'm going to choose incorporated, and I'm going to choose an abbreviation. It says I can use an abbreviation for this. Let me pause for a second and tell you about signals. And again, the signals are these words: corporation, company, incorporated, or limited. These signals let the general population know that this is a corporation. And you may think, well, why does the general population care or even want to know that this entity is a corporation instead of a general partnership or instead of a sole proprietorship or some other type of business entity? Well, as a practical matter, they probably don't care, but the fact that it's set up as a corporation does have some legal significance to consumers and other people doing business. Let's imagine that I, Sally consumer, drops off my dog at the dog training school, and I come back for the dog 2 weeks later, and the dog has died. It died, and I want to sue the school because of that. And the person who owns this school, Trixie, is a multi-gazillionaire. She is an heiress and inherited $100 million. And so I want to sue her for a lot of money, and I think a jury will be very angry at her for the way that she treated my dog. But in fact, Trixie has incorporated this business, and so her personal assets, the assets that she hasn't invested in the business, I can't successfully sue to get. I can only sue for the assets that are actually part of the Dog Training School Incorporated. If they own some real estate, if they have some cash, if they have some supplies of various types, I can sue and gain that, but I cannot sue Trixie, the multimillionaire. Now, if the entity had been a sole proprietorship of Trixie's under those circumstances, then yes, I could sue as an individual. So this signal, INC, tells me, the consumer, hey, you can't sue Trixie, you can just sue this business. Now, as a practical matter, are there going to be too many people who hire a dog training service that are going to notice or care that it's incorporated versus being a sole proprietorship? Probably not. But if Trixie doesn't use the right signals, then she might find that a court will say, hey, Trixie, you could have used the right signals, but you didn't. And as a result, that consumer, Sally, who lost her dog, is going to be able to sue you personally. So it's very, very important you have these signals. It's important that you use them when you're required to use them. You're not required to put them everywhere. When Trixie has the advertisement, she's not going to say in big letters, Dog Training School Incorporated. She's going to say Trixie's Tricks. But probably somewhere in that advertisement or the contract that I signed when I dropped off my dog, there was something that listed Dog Training School Incorporated. At least there should have been, so that I was on notice. So let's go to the next thing. Article 2, registered agent and registered office. And you can see they refer me to the instructions. I need to complete A or B, and I need to complete C. Okay, in this case, I'm going to choose to have an individual. So I'm going to add this right here. And the individual who is going to be the initial registered agent is actually going to be Trixie. Trixie's middle initial is T. And her last name is Taylor. She doesn't have any suffix. So now I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to list her business agent. Oops, excuse me. Okay, and she has her office at 123. Oops. 123 Main Street. We'll say it's in Allen, Texas. And we'll say it's in 75002. Okay? So we have now completed Article 2. If I had checked A instead of B, I would still have needed to complete C. So let's go down to the list of directors. See, it tells me that a minimum of 1 director is required. The Board of Directors constitutes the initial Board of Directors and the names and addresses of the person or persons who will serve as directors until the first annual meeting of shareholders or until their successors are elected and qualified as follows. Well, guess who's going to be our first director? Oops. Oops. Yeah. Oops. Hardest part about this is making the form work. Here we go. Trixie T. Taylor, no suffix, and she's at 123 Main Street in Allen. This one doesn't have to be in Texas. The first one does. The registered agent has to be in Texas because the actual service has to be in the state of Texas. So even if I'm doing business in 20 different states, let's say this Trixie has tremendous success in her dog training school, and she's going to have an agent in each one of hers. So I'm not going to complete anything for Director 2 or Director 3 because she doesn't have any. The next one is we have to have the number of authorized shares. Now, of course, if there's something that was required for this particular entity, and this was your assignment, then you would have been given information about the number of shares that the particular entity wanted to authorize. So let's pretend that I had that information, and I'm going to say that we are going to authorize 1,000 shares. And we are going to elect to have no par value. A little trivia about Texas. Some states require that shares have a par value. In Texas, they're not required to have a par value. The next section is already completed for us. And this is what's called a broad purpose statement in the Article 5 section. The purpose for which the corporation is formed is for the transaction of any and all lawful business for which a for-profit corporation may be organized under the Texas Business Organizations Code. I don't have to do anything there. They've already done it for me. And if I needed to add any additional information here, for example, I might say, this corporation is a close corporation. Don't know if I need to have that or not, but that would be an example. You can just populate this field as you see appropriate. Then we list the name of the organizer. Guess who that would be? We're going to say it's Trixie T. Taylor. And I think we know her address at this point. Oops. And she's still in Allen. Still in Texas, and you can see here there's some flexibility. It's not necessary that the organizer be in Texas. After all, if this were a business that was starting in a different state but just chose to incorporate in Texas, then you need to populate that field. Okay. Then we have 3 choices for the effectiveness of the date. It tells us pick A, B, or C. We only are going to pick one. This document becomes effective when the document is filed by the Secretary of State. And that seems like the best choice, so that's the one I'm going to pick. Obviously, I would read the instructions to see if that's appropriate. And then I would date this. if it's time to date this. I'm just going to pick a date here. I'll pick 7/7. Oops. 7. Maybe they want a wet signature on that, or wet dating on that. Let's see if we can put the name, and as you can imagine, Trixie. Not letting that populate. Okay, for some reason that's not populating. Not to worry. Let's go back to our choices, and let's go to the assignment that we have and look at that. Okay, and this is our assignment. Your client is Diego Davis, the sole proprietor of ABC Brake Repair. He would like to convert his business into a limited liability company. So we know which entity to pick. Let's go back here. We're going to look at Form 205, Certificate of Formation for a Limited Liability Company. He needs your help in drafting the paperwork that an attorney will review before it is submitted. Of course, I'm providing that information to point out the fact that as a paralegal, you aren't able to do this for Diego on your own. You need to have an attorney approve it. He, meaning Diego, would like to keep the name ABC Brake Repair and simply add LLC to the end. That is a signal. Let's go look at the form here. I'm going to go to Word since I have more life there. You might have no trouble at all with the PDF. I'm not discouraging you from using it, but the Word is going to be definitely easy to do. And so you'd probably want to look here about Article 1 to see, is Diego's hope a reasonable one to do? Is there any problem with using the name that he has selected? If you don't see a problem, then you can go on from there. Let's go back to the instructions. Mr. Davis would be the registered agent for the LLC, so you would know you put in the area of Form 205, you would add him as the registered agent, and he would accept service of process at his brake repair shop, and we have the address. Oh, look, it's the same one I just used, which is also where any correspondence to Mr. Davis should be sent. Mr. Davis has elected to not have managers for his business as he plans to continue running it himself. My guess is, hint, hint, that this is going to be one of the choices you have to make on the form. Mr. Davis will be the sole governing person as well as the organizer, as he's the only member of the LLC. So it looks like there's probably going to be several places on the form where you're going to add Diego Davis at this address that we have here, the one on Main Street in Allen. You have discussed this project with the responsible attorney, Throckmorton Miller, and he said that there is no need for anything in the supplemental provisions information section of the form. The LLC should be effective once a certificate of formation is filed with the Texas Secretary of State. It should be prepared for Mr. Davis' signature. You should also, so this is the first part, you're going to complete Form 205. And you should have all the information that you need. If you discover that there's some information you feel you need, but it's omitted from this, then you would leave that information blank. And you would talk about it in the cover letter, or in the letter you're going to send to Mr. Davis. Something like, hey, Mr. Davis, or you could be more formal than this. Thank you for your business, Mr. Davis. I'm not sure what you want to put here, or something along those lines. So your second part of your project is to complete this letter to Mr. Davis. And obviously you're going to put it on the letterhead for Mr. Throckmorton Miller's law firm, which is Miller, Cannon, and Mourinho letterhead. In that letter, you're going to enclose the certificate of formation that you've drafted, that Form 205 that's been completed, and ask Mr. Davis to review and sign it, and then return it to you with a check to the Secretary of State, that's who it should be made out to, in the amount of $300, which of course is the filing fee. The letter should be dated, the letter that you're sending to Mr. Davis should be dated the date that you submit your assignment, unless you submit your assignment after 4 p.m. on Friday or on Saturday or Sunday. In that case, you should date the letter for the following Monday. Okay, so those are instructions. So there's two aspects to the assignment. So when you submit it, you'll actually be submitting 2 documents. Or you might combine them into one posting and have them in one document. I guess if you're doing it as a Word file, that would be very easy to do. So good luck with this assignment. If you have any questions, you're welcome to come to my office hours and talk about them. If there's a question that you feel is something that can be handled through email, you're welcome to send it to me. But if you need help creating the documents, you're not quite sure what goes where, it's probably better to come to my office hours so we can spend some time going over the ins and outs of it. Thank you for your attention, and I will end this lecture at this time. And go back here and we'll close the application sharing. And thank you for your attention. Have a good evening.